I'm Amy Kerming, and welcome to our Cuento speaker series. Ashley, it's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
So glad. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your adoption story, about where you were born and when you were adopted?
Sure. So again, my name is Ashley Westerman, and I am 33 years old. I was born on January 25th, 1988, in Valenzuela City in Manila. So that's the Manila metro area. I was in a orphanage, or actually more like a home for unwed mothers, called the Heart of Mary Villa, for the first 10 months of my life. And then I was adopted by Sonia and Vernon Westerman in December of 1988. So I only spent about 10 months there. And then I moved to rural Western Kentucky. And if I could describe to you where that is, the best thing I can say is it is where Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois meet.
Okay.
That triangle, about an hour south of that. Hour, 30 minutes, an hour south of that. So so I was their first child. They had gotten married in 1980 and tried to have children and just could not. And so they finally decided to adopt. And I'm actually one of 4 adopted Filipinos in my family on my dad's side.
Oh, that's neat.
I like to tell people that I was adopted into an American family that lived and worked in the Philippines, because I have aunts and uncles that worked there and then adopted Filipino children while they were there. And so my cousins and I are all adopted from the same orphanage, the Heart of Mary Villa in Quezon City in Manila. So I am the first of Sonia and Vernon's children. And so this is me and my mom and dad. That you can see they're wearing the Barong Tagalogs there. And then 2 years later, my mom had my little brother, John.
Wow.
And then had another son, Eric. So I am the only adopted child of the 3, but I am the oldest. And so obviously my younger brothers are their biological kids. And so that is a little bit about how I came to be in the family where I am now.
That's so neat. What was it like growing up with Filipino relatives in your family? I guess, is that something that you discussed growing up?
Absolutely. My parents did that intentionally, and I'm glad that they did, because they already knew that they would be adopting a child, and bringing that child into a predominantly white rural community. And so they at least wanted me to be able to connect with my cousins. And so that was actually kind of great. I got to, see them grow up and see some of the challenges that they went through being adopted. And, like my cousin has found her birth mother. And so her doing that, sort of inspired me to do it. So it was always really helpful. And it was also, kind of nice to have other people around, during the holidays that look like you.
Right.
And it was just sort of a very special thing, in our family.
I would think, especially growing up in rural Kentucky, that you have people who look like you. I think that's very fortunate. Why did your parents decide to adopt from the Philippines? Do you know?
Because my cousins were adopted from there.
Oh, okay. So they're older.
Yeah, they're older. They're 12 and 8 and 4 years older than me. So they all came first. And then again, my parents very intentionally adopted from the same orphanage, well, from the same country, from the same orphanage, so we would all be connected in that way.
I love that background. That is amazing. And I've never heard of that before. So that's really great. You said that your cousin had searched for her birth mother. So when did you decide to search for your, I guess, birth mother? Yeah.
My birth mother. So quite early, actually. So I grew up in a very, like I said, predominantly rural and predominantly white community. There was no one who looked like me. And because I had 2 younger brothers who were my parents' biological children, one, the oldest, John, looks like my dad's side, and Eric, the youngest, looks like my mom's side. And so I always didn't fit in and always kind of felt that way. And I also, growing up, experienced a lot of, racism and hardship in that way, because again, it was a very predominantly white community. And so, even though that, you know, even that was very hard. It was incredibly hard. But I think that wanting to find my birth mom was sort of my way of pushing through a lot of that as well. Is in the back of my head, I was like, eventually I'll grow up and be mature enough to learn how to, or to, you know, learn how to search for this woman. And so I actually decided quite young. I always knew I was adopted, obviously, and my parents have always been very, very supportive of me finding my birth mother. They've never shown anything other than optimism and support in that endeavor. So that was very, and I know I'm very privileged to be able to say that, because I've run into many adoptees whose parents are not.
Right.
So I mean, I would say Amy quite young. Like I was maybe talking about it in like 4, 5, 6, 7, quite
Oh,
young.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And for some reason, just arbitrarily, I decided to do it at 30. I guess in my like adolescent mind, I thought that maybe by the time I was 30, I would have my life together, I would have a career, I would have money, and you know, only some of those things were true when I turned 30. But I just felt like 30 would be the right time to do it, and so I literally arbitrarily just chose 30 to do it.
I feel like 30 is the age when you're younger, you think, yeah, I'm going to be completely put together and this is the
Yeah,
time I'm going to like get started. But you know what, kids, 30 sneaks up on you pretty quickly. Like before
absolutely.
you even realize that 30 is already here. So you decided to start searching at 30. What resources did you utilize to get started? Were you in contact with, let's say, your adoption agency? How did that work?
Yeah, so I've actually always been in contact with my orphanage, the
Mm.
Heart of Mary Via. For example, every Christmas, my parents would send them money. When I became an adult and had my own job, I've started, you know, doing that along with my parents. Um, Whenever I would visit the Philippines growing up, we would go and we would play with the babies that were up for adoption. And they have always been very communicative with my family, because my family has adopted 4 children from their orphanage. So anyway, so that was always sort of like my definite starting point. I knew I was going to start there. When I did start to look, you know, there's a process in which to do that. Luckily, I got to actually skip the adoption agency part, which is good, and go, because I know a lot of people who search, they have to go through their adoption agency to figure out their orphanage or to figure out their facility. I did not actually have to do that, which was incredibly helpful. And so, yeah, I contacted the orphanage, and the process is that you contact them, you tell them what you would like to do. They have to go back into your file and see if the mother wanted to be contacted. And this can vary, obviously. For example, like obviously mine did, but I know other people whose parents didn't want to be found, and the adoption agency at least will, you know, uphold those wishes of the mother. And you can, if you want to on your own, do your own search, but they won't help you if the mother wishes not to be found. And so that's what I did. And my mom said that she did not care to be, or she was open to being found. And yeah, and that just sort of went from there, and it actually went very quickly. Like it only took a few months. So
So the process from beginning to starting to find her, and then the end process of that was only a few months time.
it actually was. So I contacted them. They were like, yes, this is fine. And I said, well, then what can we do? And if you know anything about the way communications and networking works in the Philippines, usually someone knows someone knows someone knows someone. And so actually, one of the nuns at the orphanage had family in in my mother's last known location. She
Oh,
contacted her family to find out if my mother or her family was still there. She was not, but they were able to they were like, oh, but we know where she went. And so they were able to connect her. And I was actually, like I said, it only took a couple of months. And then I got a Facebook message and it was like, hey, we found your mom. Here's her picture. So like all through like
really
all
cool.
through like on a very unofficial Facebook Messenger, it seemed like.
Yeah. That is a neat that is a neat networking system that we have there over there in the Philippines. But
Yeah,
there's always that joke where, like we're all cousins and that somebody is related to somebody related to somebody. So I
yeah,
understand. How
absolutely.
much access did you have to your information prior to finding out about your birth mother, and prior to, since you were such in communication with the orphanage, did you have kind of identifying information beforehand? And during that time, during finding out things about like where your birth mother was, did any of that information change that you found when you were over there?
Sure. So I actually had a lot of information. My parents had a lot of
Mm.
information. I'll put it that way. So I knew her name. I knew her address, at least when she gave birth to me. I knew those things about her because it was all on my birth certificate. And they also did a really good job of like giving my parents this like incredible packet of like background information on her. Basically, she was 22 and unwed and came to Manila to have a child in secret, um, and pretended to be a domestic worker for over a year to have a child in secret so she could go back to her family, and pretend like she wasn't pregnant. So there's that. But yeah, so I actually had a lot of information. And then I also, in like a parallel sort of process that I've been going through to get my Philippine passport and my dual citizenship, I also requested a bunch of information from Holt International, and they were very forthcoming with that info. And so I also got a big packet of stuff from them as well. Um, Most of the stuff I already kind of knew, just like my birth certificate and like things like that. And so I just sort of used all of that to cobble together the version of her story. Her name is Lucita. That's her real name, Lucy. Lucy's story before I actually met her.
That's good. That's really interesting. What was running through your head while you were searching for her, and as you started this process?
Sure. I think what was running through my head was that I just really wanted to find someone who looked like me. I don't know anyone who looks like me. Um, None of my cousins really look like me. I don't feel like I look like a lot of other Filipinos in a lot of ways. And I can kind of explain that later when we get into Lucy's story. But I just wanted to find someone who looked like me. And I wanted answers. I mean, I wanted practical answers like, is there a history of heart disease in my family? I wanted practical answers, but I also wanted answers as to, why did you give me up?
Mhm.
Not like angrily,
Right.
because I've lived a very privileged life and I've been brought up to be very thankful for being adopted. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to know some of these really important questions and put some puzzle pieces together to help me sort of figure out a little bit more about who I was. I
Right.
won't say that that's who I am, but who I was and where I came from. And to be honest, when I got that photo on Facebook Messenger, and I wrote about this on NPR, I don't feel like we looked anything alike.
Mm.
And if I had had better wherewithal, I would have had a photo ready for you.
That's okay.
But yeah, I didn't see myself in her. And frankly, I was quite disappointed. And my understanding is that my father is a traveling salesman. So, in the literal sense and the not literal sense, I guess. So it might be near impossible to find him. And so I'm not sure if I will ever actually find someone that I look like.
Yeah.
So that was a little disappointing, but I was still going to meet her, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something that I feel isn't spoken about often. I mean, you said you had Filipino relatives within your own family. And so what was important for you was finding somebody who looked like you. So I was adopted by Filipino parents, and so everybody in my family is Filipino. But I felt very similarly that even though I am supposed to feel connected to my family and look like everybody in my family, I didn't look anything like anybody in my family. So I feel like that's something that's not spoken about often in adoptees. Is sometimes when you have sibling adoptees, they want to adopt somebody from the same country so that they have somebody who kind of looks like them. But with your experience in having those relatives and you not looking like other people, how did that make you feel, I guess, growing up in that family? Like, did you feel disconnected a little bit, or yeah, how does that feel in the moment?
I wouldn't say I felt disconnected. I think I would say that I realized at a very early age that Filipinos weren't monoliths.
Right.
Kind of like Asians aren't monoliths, Filipinos aren't monoliths. And that actually made me feel, kind of special in a way. But like, I have a cousin who looks very Chinese.
Mm.
She clearly has a lot of Chinese background. I have my male cousin looks Polynesian, and he clearly has a lot of Polynesian blood in him. And so, I mean, I guess I never really felt disconnected from them because I had to feel connected to them. I didn't have much of a choice. And so I wasn't making those divisions in my head. But again, I think, in the end, it just made me sort of realize that like not all Filipinos look the same, and that's okay. And actually, when I did do the 23andMe,
Oh yeah.
and I, in case there was any doubt, so I came out like 98.9% Filipino.
Right.
And I found out later that that's because my mother is indigenous. And
Oh.
it also must mean that my father had to also be part indigenous as well. So I am very Filipino.
Yeah.
Even though I have no idea how to be Filipino. But yeah.
That's funny. So we spoke about how long it took in the process to find your birth mother. When was she found? Like how I guess she was open to meeting you. So how did the communication start in that process?
Yeah, so the communication really just started with the orphanage. They found her at the end of 2017. I had already sort of planned to go to the Philippines anyways the next year to do some work. I am a journalist. I've covered Southeast Asia for years. I've traveled back and forth many times. And so I'd already planned to be there. And so from like the end of 2017 into 2018, when I went there in February. I just spoke with the orphanage. I did not speak with her because she doesn't speak English.
Oh, okay.
So that was going to be impossible. But I will say that the orphanage did arrange for her to take a bus from La Union, which is in the northern part of Luzon, down to Manila to meet me. Oh, nice. And so that's just how we communicated before we actually met in person.
How did that make you feel ultimately, knowing that process was going and you're going to meet her during this time? What did that feel like?
I mean, it felt a little like not real because it didn't take very long. It wasn't a huge struggle. Yeah. And I didn't have to like fight for info, and everyone was very friendly about it. And so it was a little surreal, honestly, that it took so long because I've talked to adoptees where they can't get past the adoption agency when it comes to trying to find their birth parents. So I was very fortunate, and it just seemed a little surreal. And it all happened at a very important time in my life too. I was in the midst of getting a divorce from my first husband. And it was like a great time to have something amazing or wild happen, I guess. Because my life was already sort of like in chaos in DC. So I wanted to go to the Philippines and like do something that might be meaningful. So I also had that going through my head as well, leading up to finally meeting her.
There was a lot going on. So what did you do to prepare in that process? I don't know. I guess emotionally, I guess physically, you were already going to the Philippines and you were already there. So you were in Manila at the time, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I was. So a couple of things I did before I left the US. I actually put together a picture book of my life for her, because I knew that she didn't speak English very well, and so if I could at least get with a translator and get through this picture book to show her my life, then maybe that would be helpful, and she could take that with something physical she could take with her back to her home. So I did that. I spoke to my parents. My mom asked me if she wanted me to be there, if I wanted her to be there. And I said, no, I think I can do this on my own. And then she and my dad like jetted off to Antarctica for that time period. And I think that was
Yeah.
their way of like coping with all of that, which
Right.
is fine. I'm glad they had a good time. But I think my mom was a little confused that I didn't want her there, but she wanted to respect my wishes. So I did that. And I spoke with the people closest to me here about, just the things I was feeling, and they were all very excited for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have no idea what growing up the way we grow up is like, but they were very encouraging. I mean, no one ever told me not to do it,
Right.
which was really helpful, right?
Right.
And then I went to Manila. I actually spent a week. I spent a week in Boracay with a friend who had two other friends, and aside, we were all in various stages of divorce, which
Okay.
was really interesting. So it was like a great week of just like hanging out with a bunch of women and just like talking about all of our life's problems, whether it had to do with family or men or, just our careers or whatever. So that was so good to sort of just relax before going and doing this really important thing.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I did to prepare.
Right. So you had a nice vacation time, like hanging out on the beach and hanging out with your friends before this event. So what did it feel like when that day finally arrived, when you were ready and you're ready to go? How did that feel?
Oh, it was nerve-wracking. I have to say, it's quite, I usually stay in Makati in Manila when I stay there. And that's quite a long way from Quezon City. So you have a very long drive to think about all the things. And that's a really long time to consider bailing, but I was fine. One thing that I did do was I reported out this entire process for NPR. And so I think because I am a journalist and because I was able to sort of attack this through the lens of telling and the process of telling a story, I was able to get through it. Like, I really don't quite know if I had just like done it and not have been able to write about it, because I needed to be able to like process it. And so yeah, it was like super nerve-wracking. And I'd been to this location, I'd been to the orphanage many times before, but this is very, very different, and it was very hot and sticky. And the taxi driver didn't really understand my English, and I didn't understand his Tagalog, and so that was frustrating. But it was surreal. It was just kind of like I was just like walking through this like fog. Yeah. And like trying to like reach something that I knew that I needed to do and had been wanting to do for a long time. And then when it finally happened, it was kind of crazy. So
what did happen when you finally met her?
So I was taken into a room where they have the reunions. The women at the orphanage, the nuns, are very used to doing this type of stuff. And so if you'd like, I can actually play you the moment that I met her. Yes, yeah, hold on just a second. And this is from the story that I did for NPR. So.
I didn't have any expectations when it finally happened.
Hi.
When Lucita Timbal Picaño walked into the room, she hugged me, like a mother who had been missing something for decades.
And that was it. I have to say, Amy, I was very surprised that I was able to hit record before that moment, because I was shaking and it was very nerve-wracking, and there was a lot of crying on both of our parts. And then we, cried and hugged, and she seemed very, relieved to see me. She kept smiling at me in this like weird coy way of like where you smile at someone because you like them, but you don't really know if they like you. And then, we sat down and we talked for like a few, maybe an hour or so through a translator. She told me about her life. I told her about mine. Some discoveries were made. I found out I'm not an oldest child, which was a bit devastating, honestly, because I've always considered myself a type A oldest child.
Right.
I actually have an older brother from her first marriage. She is an indigenous woman from Bohol, and she had an arranged marriage when she was 14. And she had a son, and that husband abused her. And so she divorced him, but because of the way the laws work in the Philippines, the son had to go to the dad, not to her.
Wow.
And so then she got pregnant with me and then came to Manila to pretend to be a domestic worker while she stayed at this home for unwed mothers to have me in secret.
Yeah.
And then she went home. She's from Bohol, but she was born in Cagayan de Oro, which is in the northern part of Mindanao. Very conservative part of the country. And so she had me, came home, pretended like she didn't, and went on with her life and ended up marrying a fisherman, moved up to northern Luzon, and I have 3 younger siblings.
Oh, wow.
I have 3 younger siblings, and the youngest one looks like me when I was younger.
Oh.
And so that was kind of nice to be able to finally see someone who looked like me.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, we just talked for a while, and then that was it was interesting. It was hard. It was really hard. The translation was really hard, having to like wait for responses and stuff. But I recorded all of it, and I'm so glad I did.
Well, I know how that made me feel. I'm a little bit of a mess right now, but oh my God. Yeah, so I do know how it felt for me, but I guess how did it feel for you? Not just in the moment. You said it was hard because there was a translator coming in between. Did you have moments where maybe you felt like you didn't need, your translate? Maybe there was there a connection? Like, how did you feel?
Frankly, there was a connection, but there wasn't a spark.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like there was a connection in that this woman is important to me. I should know that. She's clearly treating me like someone that she loves very deeply and that she hasn't seen in a very long time. And she was very earnest and sincere about, being very proud of me and all of those things. But, in the end, and this sort of goes to the title of my story for NPR, and that is that I met my birth mother, or I found my birth mother, and it didn't rock my world, and that's okay. It's because by the end of it, I was just ready to go home. Like I was kind of done. I kind of felt like I had come to interview somebody and learned a lot about them. And learned a lot of interesting things about her and interesting things about people I connected to that I didn't know. But in the end, it really didn't have like a huge impact on my life. I don't know if I'm just very good at compartmentalizing or what, but who I really wanted to be with after that was my mom, was Sonia, my adopted mom. And I actually wasn't able to call her for a few days, and that was a little upsetting. But it is something that happened in all of my siblings because the internet, Facebook is the internet in the Philippines. So all of my siblings have added me, and she's added me, but we don't talk.
Right.
We don't really interact very much. She likes my photos, and my little sisters like my photos and things like that, but we don't really interact. And so it was a moment in time that was special and needed to happen, but it hasn't greatly affected me one way or the other. And I think that's okay. I think that, media and Hollywood tell us, and the books that we read tell us that we're supposed to come away from this interaction with like a new whatever on life. And if you did, that's great. But if you didn't, that's okay too. And I didn't. And I think that's fine. And I think more people also need to hear that, because I think some people have been made to feel bad that they don't feel like it was revolutionary.
Yeah. So. Do you feel similarly now? You're, a few years detached from the meeting and thinking about it in retrospect. Do you feel any different from it now? Do you wish your mother was there? Like, do you wish the circumstances were different? Any of that?
No, not really. I think it happened. I'm very practical in that way, in that I believe things happen because they're supposed to happen in the way that they have, no matter how hard or hurtful or sad it was, or not. So I don't regret anything about the way that it went down. I will also say that I wrote about it because one, I had a platform to do so. And I know I'm very privileged to have that. A major news organization willing to publish a 3-part series on me finding my mom, like who else is going to get that, you know? And so I felt obligated. I also felt obligated because I knew that there are so few accounts of us meeting our birth parents or even sharing our stories, because for some weird reason in 2021 being adopted is still weirdly taboo. That was a duty of mine to do that. And it also helped me process what I was feeling and what I went through. And so and I will say that, you know, I wrote that story in 2018, and still today, you know, like every month or so, I get an email from someone in the world who has who Googled just out of curiosity and found my story and reached out. And I will never, ever say no to virtual coffee with these people, to tell them about my process and sort of help them brainstorm ways of how to like either get the process started, or maybe start talking to their families about it, or something like that. So I'm glad I did all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice do you have for others who might want to take a similar journey?
Yeah, so if you're in a good place with your parents, talk to them about it. Because I think a lot of adoptees live in fear of what their parents will think, but then they never ask about it. Now, should it be on you to do that? Probably not, but they might also not be thinking about it either. Your parents might also not be thinking that you want to do this thing. And so, you know, you should ask. Yeah. And you might actually find support in places that you didn't realize that you had support in. I think that's really important. The other thing I would say is reach out to, you know, people who have found their birth parents, like me, like, I don't know, I think Nicole Chung, who writes a lot about adoption issues, you know, reach out to any of the adoption organizations. Actually will also happily put you in touch with people who have done this sort of process. And I think just like talking to people who have done it, right, and being sort of willing to do a little bit of research before you dive right in will help you immensely with not just how you're feeling about it, but also like the process. Like there's some things that you just like need to know. Like for example, like I didn't know that I had, you know, that my mother had to have given consent way back when I was born to meet me decades later. Like that's important to know. And your orphanage may or may not have had that policy, but it's good to like look out for that. Another sort of interesting thing is that we're all Balik Bayans, so all of us that were born there at least. So we can go back actually and spend up to a year on a visa finding, you know, doing what we need to do to find the people we need to find and do, you know. And if that process takes a while and you think that it's going to take a while and you feel like you need to be on the ground, guess what? You can legally be there even during a pandemic. So things like that are just like really helpful in just talking to people.
Yeah, that's really great information to have, especially about going back and being able to spend time there, especially if you're trying to get in contact with your culture and your roots. I think that's a really great idea. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
I would say just even if you're just a little bit curious, just like look into it. And it's okay to not be curious as well. But even if you're just a little curious, maybe look into it. Maybe fantasize a little bit. And if it's too much, then you can stop and back off and put it away and never think about it again. But if you look into it just a little bit, it might be something that you realize you have been missing and pieces of your puzzle that you want to complete. Mm-hmm. And it actually might be something you want to do, and it's not scary. And it might not be revolutionary, and it might be nothing, and your story is yours. But just having sort of like no expectations is good. Yeah. And even thinking about this process. So that's like sort of the last thing I would say is don't, your expectations are yours,
Mhm.
and not to really hang your hat or base your decision to find your birth parents on someone else's experience, but just know that there's like a plethora of things that could happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ashley, for joining us for our speaker series, Cuento Cuento. I really appreciate you sharing your story. It's such a unique perspective, and I think anybody is lucky to be able to hear it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.